We did hear President Trump responding to the tragedy. He blamed Democrats, he blamed diversity initiatives for the mid-air collision. CNN's Caitlin Collins asked a question of the president on his claims.
We don't even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Black Hawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane? You think that's going to make a difference?
Does it comfort their families?
They
to
are
hear you
a
blaming
group of
DEI
people that have
policies?
lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that.
CNN's Jeff Zeleny is with us now. Pete Muntean joining us as well. Jeff, let's go to you first. This pivot immediately to politics. Tell us about this.
Brianna, it was nearly an instant pivot. The president walked into the briefing room, asked for a moment of silence, and he talked about the anguished hour of the nation. And then he specifically launched into a litany of really baseless claims that diversity initiatives inside this government are to blame for air traffic control shortages and perhaps the staffing that was on board. Now, when he was pressed on these claims, asking what evidence does he have that it led to any of it, he basically says he doesn't, but then he said it's common sense. In another breath, he also seemed to place some blame, or at least point some blame, to the Army soldiers on the Black Hawk helicopter. So look, the reality of this is we have seen every president, as long as the television age has existed, come and speak to the nation, before that on radio, of course, and offer a measure of comfort, of concern. We heard that, but we heard so much blame that was placed. Brown, very reminiscent of the first Trump administration, placing blame on this. But the reality is, when you look a little careful here, he blamed the Obama administration, the Biden administration. He served between those two presidents, as we well know. And many of these initiatives that he was talking about were actually in place during his administration. But never mind any of that. That really is all sort of background noise here to the fact that he clearly now is in charge of his government. And this is his federal workforce that is under assault in many respects. There are open questions, open positions at so many agencies, including the FAA. So regardless of the blame being pointed around, the reality here is this is happening on his watch. And it's his administration's a burden now to get to the bottom of this.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. And Pete, tell us where we are with the facts. What do we know right now about the potential cause of this collision?
It is much too soon, Brianna, to lay any sort of blame on diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring practices at the FAA or on the staff in the air traffic control tower there at Reagan National Airport. The big key here is that we have not heard from the National Transportation Safety Board just yet. They are the leaders of this investigation. We are likely to hear from them at 5:30. But let's reset here about what we do know about what took place during this crash. American Airlines Flight 5342 on its way from Wichita, Kansas, scheduled to land at Reagan National Airport about 10 to 9, 8:50 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday night. That flight clearly did not make it. That flight was slated to line up according to the instructions from air traffic controllers, according to the tapes from liveatc.net, on what's called the Mount Vernon visual approach, lining up with the busiest runway in the National Airspace System, runway 1 at National Airport. And there you can see the video of the outcome. This UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter from the Army's 12th Aviation Battalion apparently hitting this flight. That helicopter flight was in something called Route 4, a special corridor on the east side of the Potomac River, just offset a little bit from the National Airport there and close to Maryland and Bowling, Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. It runs north-south. And so now the conversation in aviation is why that corridor is able to exist so close to paying airline passengers when this flight was using an approach that is regularly used called the Circle to Land of 33, an auxiliary runway that goes to the northwest. Some really big questions now about the setup of the airspace there and why those airplanes, those two aircraft, that airplane and helicopter, were able to coexist in such close proximity. If you have been to the district, you know that helicopters are a way of life here. They're always buzzing moving around up and down the Potomac, up and down the Anacostia, overhead neighborhoods. Sometimes it can feel like a scene from out of a movie here. We are bombarded by noise from helicopters. The air traffic controller in the tower there, according to the tower tapes, did ask the pilots of that Black Hawk helicopter, who were apparently on a night training mission, if they had that airplane in sight, and they responded affirmatively. They said yes, and that they were going to pass behind it. So some really big questions here, and of course, investigators will want to get to the bottom of this. They'll be looking at that video. They'll also be getting the tapes from the tower to try and piece together this incident, not to mention the physical evidence that is still there in the cold Potomac River.
And we are learning more about the pilots on that Black Hawk helicopter that was involved in last night's crash and exactly how much experience they had. CNN's Natasha Bertrand joins us now live from the Pentagon. Natasha, what are you learning about these pilots?
Well, Boris, we had been hearing from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth that these crew members on board that Black Hawk helicopter, they did have a fair amount of experience, and now we are learning just how much. According to a senior Army official who spoke to us just a bit ago, the instructor pilot, who was essentially the pilot in command of this Black Hawk helicopter, had about 1,000 flight hours, and his co-pilot, or their co-pilot, we don't know the identities of these crew members just yet, had about 500 flight hours. So between them, they had about 1,500 flight hours, and that is really not insignificant considering, according to the senior Army official, that each of these flights is about 2 hours on average, particularly these training missions. So you can do the math there. I mean, this was not an inexperienced crew, of course, raising even more questions about just went wrong here. Now, we do not know yet whether those 3 U.S. Army soldiers have been recovered, and we are told that next of kin notification processes are still ongoing, so we have not yet gotten their identities. But in addition to that, this senior U.S. Army official also told us that this is such a routine flight path, right? This is a flight path that they carry out really all the time, really on a daily basis, whether it's for training missions, picking up and dropping off senior U.S. government officials. This is a very routine thing. And so that is going to factor in, of course, to the investigation, just figuring out what went wrong here. Was it pilot error? Was it something having to do with air traffic control? That is all going to be discussed and investigated by the Army, by the NTSB, by the FAA in the hours and days ahead, Boris.
Yeah, and without a doubt, months and potentially years. Natasha Bertrand, thank you so much for that update from the Pentagon. Let's dig deeper now with Mary Schiavo. She's a former Inspector General for the Department of Transportation. And David Soucy is with us. He's a former FAA Safety Inspector. Thank you both for sharing part of your afternoon with us. Mary, when you watch the video of the collision, what stands out to you?
Well, the first thing that stood out to me is that there were 2 aircraft lights and a helicopter light. And the interesting thing about flying at night, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's part of the best part of my training, is the first light you notice is the lights that are moving. And if a plane is coming at you, it's not moving, it's getting brighter. And so I noticed when I looked at the video, the other plane first, because I noticed the movement. And I think what leaps out at me is in the busiest, one of the busiest runways in America, and the busiest air traffic corridor in America, one of the busiest, asking a pilot wearing night goggles, hey, do you have that aircraft in sight, is not a very good way to carry out aircraft separation, and major changes have to be made. That's what I thought.
David, I want to play the audio of that conversation between air traffic control and the flight crews. Not really a conversation, just a communication. Let's listen.
S25, CRJ in flight. S25, pass is CRJ.
S5 has a aircraft in sight, president separation.
Separate. American 472, Washington Star, 1 star, 32017.
That silence, I imagine, will be parsed by investigators. David, what significance do you find to what you just heard?
Well, one of the things, I've flown hundreds and hundreds of times in and out of DCA at night when I was based in Washington, D.C., flying in the cockpit, in the jump seat, observing pilots. So it is a very difficult airport to get in and out of, and there's a lot going on What jumps out to me in this is the fact that typically the military aircraft are using a UHF frequency and the commercial airplanes are using the VHF frequency. So hearing each other speak, kind of overhearing the other conversations, gives you a better sense of situational awareness. You know what's going on. You know that that airplane got approval, that airplane got approval. But when you're talking about military versus commercial communications, sometimes they're not on the same frequency, so you don't get that benefit. So that whole conversation that was going on, the commercial pilot may not have heard any of that going on.